Aloha. I always want to say that as many times as I can. We've been in Hawaii for 2 months and we feel the aloha. And I especially want to send that out to you, entrepreneurs, because I love entrepreneurs. I love that Brother Tejan was just talking about entrepreneurship and social impact. Because you don't just say, I want to make the world a better place. You say, I want to make the world a better place in this specific way, by this idea that I have, by this way that I want to live my life, by this impact that I want to have in the world. And I was just talking to Jordan just for like a hot second, and I said, what's your idea? And she said, I'm trying to be an entrepreneur. I don't know my ideas yet, but I really love this concept about being my own boss, working for myself, having that autonomy. And I think just from the get-go, I just want to acknowledge that we all feel that imposter syndrome. Jordan, you are an entrepreneur, okay? You are. And whatever your idea is, you don't know for sure if it's going to work. You don't know for sure if it's going to go over. You don't know for sure if there's going to be a market fit. But you're showing up anyway. And so I want to thank you for your bravery and your generosity, and just let you know that we need you. Okay. I took a few notes, mostly so that I won't talk too much. My name is Erik Orton, and Eric and I were attending BYU Provo. We got married in 1996. Now we have 5 children. Our oldest is 21, just finished her 4th year at BYU, heading to Provo and heading into her 5th. We have a 20-year-old daughter who's serving a mission in Tokyo, Japan. It's the one with the long red hair in the middle, that's the one in Japan. Our 17-year-old daughter is the blondie. She's here with us. She's surfing and wrestling while we're here in Hawaii. And our son, the only boy, and he feels sorry for himself sometimes, and that he's an artist. And then we have Lily with her eyes shut up there. She is the most famous Orton. Lily is totally fearless. She has no social boundaries, and in fact, she made a real splash for herself here in Laie last year when she crashed the Laie Elementary School May Day over at PCC. She just ran across the stage and did a curtsy to the king and queen for May Day, and then the king gave up his chair, she sat down, and it went like, to us, that was viral, yeah, that got so many shares. The king was Manulele Ayu, and he was #RaceRight. So, I majored in English teaching with a minor in Spanish teaching, and one of my professors at BYU Provo said to me one day, like, why don't you finish up, your 3 years teaching, get a master's PhD program real quick, 3 years, and then come back and be a professor teaching other teachers with us. And at first I was super flattered, but then she said that, she goes, you can support your husband's theater hobby. I was like, you do not even know my husband. So anyway, I want to tell you a little bit about my husband. Erik Orton majored in media, music, and playwriting. And have you ever heard of Broadway? Raise your hand if you have heard of that, Broadway. Most towns have one, but in New York City it's a bunch of theaters where they put on super expensive shows. Have you ever been to a Broadway show? Maybe, yeah? Okay, nice. So when we were in college, that was like the laser beam focus, was work on Broadway. Erik writes musicals and plays. He has an analytical brain. He can do the management side, like the full picture, producing everything. So when we got out of college, our big dream was we want to go work on Broadway. And I'm just going to give you a highlights reel from what we have done for the past 20 years. And in any normal social situation, I wouldn't stand up here, introduce myself, and then brag on my husband, but this is an exception. So Erik has written and co-written several musicals and plays. He has worked on Broadway on some shows you may have heard of, like Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, Wicked. He wrote an original musical called Berlin that was made into a TV movie, for which he won an Emmy and a couple of other awards that are sitting on our bookshelf. He produced another musical that somebody else wrote called The Ark, off Broadway, and he's going to tell you more about that later. Like, it was such a fun project, but it didn't turn out the way we hoped. He's worked in graphic design at an investment bank, and we went, it's not up there now, but we went sailing for a year with our family, with 5 kids. At the time, they were ages 6 to 16. And we sailed from St. Martin in the Caribbean all the way back to the island where we live, Manhattan. And we've lived in New York City since 1999. If you haven't been there, it's about half the size of Oahu with about 4 times as many people. So, same thing. After we got back from living on a sailboat for a year, we had to rebuild some funds, and Eric went into a completely different line of work. He went into sales for a solar company, for Vivint Solar, and he was their fastest promoted manager. He opened 3 new areas in 18 months. He was one of their top 10 salespeople, and at the same time, he also was asked to be the artistic director of America's oldest summer theater, regional theater called the Cape Playhouse in Cape Cod. So he was running an office, solar office in New York, and running a theater in Massachusetts at the same time, and it was just crazy. And after a while, we decided that we wanted to pivot. I think that was yesterday's word. Was that yesterday's word for attendance? Pivot. We decided to pivot and felt really strongly about this project of writing a book, a memoir about our time living on a sailboat as a family and the things that we learned. We knew that we wanted to be in intellectual properties, and that was that kind of thing, like a book that could multiply itself without us being there. We're so excited because last week, 7 at Sea was reviewed in the New York Times as their top pick under the travel category for what you should read this summer. I mean, you choose for yourself, and I always recommend checking it out at the library, but it felt good to get a little love from our hometown paper. In the last couple of years, we've been traveling a lot. We've been in the van, sailboat, tents, whatever, and we traveled across the US, Canada, Europe, and right now we're exploring the Pacific. This weekend we're flying to New Zealand for a couple of months, and we're so excited to learn more about the people there. So that's our 20 years, but I want to tell you before Eric stands up, and I'm so jealous because he's going to walk around and be among you, but I want to tell you a story of how he almost didn't graduate. So when we were at BYU, and he knew that he wanted to write musicals, he spoke with a professor and got a mentor who allowed them to do this weird thing where they actually set up a class to produce this musical. And setting up this musical as a class meant that he and his collaborator were going to write and produce a full-length musical in 1 semester, that they would get university resources like a rehearsal space. They would get to use the recording studio on campus to record the music and make an album. They would have a theater where they could then produce the show. And all the students who participated, nobody was getting paid, but they would all get credit. So they were trying to create these like win-win scenarios for everyone. So the show, I'll just tell you quick, the show was about a guy named Daniel O'Connell, who was an Irish Catholic hero who was born in 1775. And if that sounds boring, I'll just say this guy was like a cross between George Washington and Gandhi. He was pretty cool. And I thought it was a great show. And so did everybody who came to see it. So we weren't allowed to sell tickets at the show, but we were allowed to sell these albums that we had recorded in the university space. So during intermission for the show, we had like a 10-month-old daughter at the time, and I would go stand at a table. Do any of you even have a CD? Do you own a CD? Yay! Okay, so like vintage, right? Well, we used to have these CDs, and there were these like circles that carried like a whole album worth of music on them, and they came in these annoying little plastic boxes with little tabs. And so what we would do, we actually had a machine that hooked to our computer. We would burn the CD at our tiny little married student apartment, and then we printed out the CD covers. We cut them out with a pair of scissors. And then we would put the cover inside the box, and this was like one of the first products that we were able to sell. And so we packaged those up, and at intermission, with the baby on my hip, I would sell CDs. And then when it wasn't intermission, I put the baby on a blanket on the floor in the light booth, and I was running the lights. And I just point this out because I think so much when you're an entrepreneur, it's so important to have a partnership with your spouse. Not that they have to be running the lights, but that as you go on these journeys of emotional risk, so nice to have a partner who supports and understands what you're doing and is willing to be at your side emotionally, if not, physically, like I was in that case. So that was a great way to end the year. We felt so excited. The show was a hit. And then we decided that we were going to drive across the country to Washington, D.C. because we were going to make some East Coast money. I don't know if you know, but jobs pay better on the East Coast than in Utah. So his parents lived in Virginia, right outside D.C. And so we got in this gold Pontiac Thunderbird with our 10-month-old baby. I had a picture of it, but yep, there she is. I love how our faces are reflected in the roof of the car. It's just a gas station. We didn't stop very much because we wanted to get there quick. But we drove, I think I wrote it down, 2,106 miles sitting side by side in that car. And it wasn't until we pulled up into his parents' driveway that Erik said to me, I want to produce the show here in DC. Like, I just had this idea. So that is part of being married to an entrepreneur. So I was like, great, we're going to produce this show. And the baby's bedroom turned into his office. He purchased a landline because, no cell phones, and set it up for his show. He made a deal with a local theater. He made a deal with a local printer to trade advertising in the program for printing signs and programs. We funded this venture on our very low limit credit card, and we flew in actors and the lead actors, and then we auditioned local talent, and we housed everybody at his parents' or at neighbors' houses. We built the set out of wood and burlap in his backyard. We all sewed burlap that summer. All the actors played multiple roles. They learned their lines, their lyrics, and Erik wrote this really complex counterpoint harmonies that was driving them crazy as well. This was all pre-Google, pre-YouTube, pre-social media, pre-smartphone, so we advertised on the grocery store bulletin boards. We got on radio shows. We even got a couple of TV spots, which was fun. The deal that we had with the theater, that it was a box office split. And this idea came in so late in the season that they didn't give us any weekends, and we didn't get any backstage space. So we had to do everything front of stage on weeknights this summer. And all the other shows laughed about it and called it the potato show. So no problem. I really love what Erik did here. He made posters that had the days that the show was playing, and he included the weekend dates on the days it was playing and then just crossed them out, like you're not able to attend on weekends, which was true, but it kind of made it look like they were sold out. And that it was a really popular show that you gotta hurry and get in because you already can't see it on the weekends. I thought it was pretty genius. He created a Proscenium, it was like a movable front of curtain, because we had to load out every weekend for the next show that was in. And that show ended up being the only profitable show at the theater that season. And we were so excited that we could pay off our credit cards, and we had enough left over to buy a brand new CD burner. So that takes us back to the CDs. Okay, I'm almost done. Another really cool part of this is that during this time, Erik had been trying to get an internship with a theatrical company in Canada. And after talking to this woman in charge of the internship for a long time, she finally said, so, what I understand is that you really just want to come have a relationship so that a producer will come see your show. And he was like, yeah, that's what I want to get out of this internship. And she said, what if I send a producer to see your show? And on the last night of the performance, this lovely dark-haired woman introduced herself to Erik, and she said, I was advised that if I did not like your show, I should leave without speaking to you. And then she introduced herself and said, how soon can you make it to New York City? And this is why he almost did not graduate. He was like, I gotta get to New York, this is my goal. My goal isn't a degree, my goal is to produce, get shows on Broadway. So we went back to school, and he spoke with the administrators, and they sorted out between his credits and his experiences that he could wrap up school in one more semester. And in that last semester, by himself, he wrote another full-length musical, the one he later got an Emmy for. He graduated, he got a management job at this big theatrical company that managed a lot of shows, like I mentioned, and he found a place for us to live in New York City, a little 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 800-square-foot apartment. And as we were leaving BYU, he kept getting these letters from the Marriott School of Business Management. And he said, what the heck is going on? Like, there must be another Erik Orton at this school, or they have the wrong address, or something like, don't they know I'm a music major? Why are they sending the invitations to come to business school? I'm not a business person. There must be some mistake. And I just think that is so hilarious because having walked by Erik's side for the last 23 years, I know that he is a creator, a team builder, a negotiator. He's a visionary, he's tenacious, he's consistent, and in these 23 years that we've raised 5 kids, we've seen successes and failures, which he's going to talk about. We've pitched ideas together, we've fundraised together, we've taken flying lessons and scuba lessons together, we spent that year on a sailboat. We actually co-wrote the book 7 at Sea, alternating chapters, and just last week we killed wild chickens and butchered them for a meal in Maui. And of all the things that we've done together, my favorite thing about Erik Orton is that he's always learning. So, ready or not? Erik Orton.
Thank you. All right, I got to turn on my mic here. Can you hear me? Is that working? Okay. All right. So thank you, Emily. I appreciate you that generous introduction. I need you guys to do something with me here real quick. I'm going to demonstrate and you're going to follow me, okay? I'm going to say, to clap, and that's what you're going to do. All right? So, to clap. One more time. To clap. Okay, that has nothing to do with anything. It just helps me feel better. So, I know that you're with me. If you're in, what's the 4 o'clock class on Wednesday night? What's that called? The one last night? Enactus? Yeah, I guess the attendance word was pivot. We're going to talk a lot about pivoting today because entrepreneurship is pivoting. Pivoting is like when I don't play basketball, but it's like you're this way and then you turn and you go this way. Or anytime like you sort of quickly change directions out of need, out of necessity. So good question. Real quick, by show of hands, how many of you are early in the first half of your college education, like freshman or what would be called a freshman or sophomore? How many of you are second half, your 3rd or 4th year? Okay. How many of you are definitely planning to be like full-time entrepreneurs? How many are kind of like this is a certificate or like a minor or like maybe, okay, all right, cool. I just want to know. Because, like Emily said, I never really considered myself an entrepreneur. I mostly considered myself a writer and an artist. But I'm going to tell you that entrepreneurship runs through everything. Whether it's going to be your main thing or your side thing, it's part of your life. But when you are an entrepreneur, it's a very immersive, complete experience that affects all aspects of your life. And so we're going to talk about some of the multifaceted parts of being an entrepreneur. I'd like to talk about my first business. I was 11 years old. We had just moved from Germany. My dad was in the Air Force, and we were living in the Washington, D.C. area. And we had a yard for the first time. And the house that this kind of fixer-upper home that my parents had bought had a yard. It was the first time we had a yard, and my job was to mow it. And the house came with this old, rusty lawnmower that didn't have a bag to catch the grass. And so I would mow it, and then I'd have to rake it. And so if you've ever been in Virginia, which is where we live, Virginia in the summer, if you love humidity, this is the place for you. And it was the most disgusting job I'd ever done up to that point. And I decided that people probably wouldn't want to do this if they didn't have to, and maybe they would pay me to do it. So at 11 years old, I drew up these little flyers, and it said my name, our home phone number, which was the only phone number we had. It said age 11, and then it said lawn care, and I drew a little picture of a lawnmower, a little picture of a rake, and a little picture of bag that was filled with either grass or leaves, depending on what your imagination filled it with. And I made 100 of these, and I took them to all the houses and townhouses immediately around, and I rolled them up, and I tucked them inside the screen door, and went home and waited for the phone to ring. And take a wild guess over the following weeks how many times my phone rang. Correct. The correct answer is once. The phone rang once, and it was some guy I didn't know who lived kind of across the street a ways, and he had this townhome with grass that was about this high And it was a 20 by 20 yard, and there was no way I could get my lawnmower into that grass. And so I had to go over there with a weed whacker and just kind of mow it all down and then rake it up and then finally go over it with a lawnmower. And it was the most disgusting, hot, sweaty job. And I think he paid me $5, which was a rough beginning, but I guess he felt like he could get away with it with an 11-year-old. But I came back, and once the first part was done, mowing it every week after that was easy. And I never advertised again. But word got out that I cut grass. And so between the ages 11 and 18, I can't tell you how many lawns I mowed. And eventually we upgraded to a nicer mower. My parents let me use their van to transport my van around to all the places where I would cut grass. And so on weekends and a couple of weeknights, I would mow lawns. And it bought me a car, paid for all my gas in high school, and pretty much everything else that I wanted or needed as I lived under my parents' roof. And that was my first business as a young person. While I'm in high school, I then added a paper route where I would buy copies of the Washington Post from a distributor, and then I had a route and subscribers in my neighborhood, and I would go out and I would deliver the newspaper 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, and I would collect payment from the subscribers, I would pay the distributor for the newspapers, and the rest would go to the bank. And that's when I learned as a young person, you don't do this anymore, but I would walk in with a stack of checks, I would do all my own banking, and that paid for a good chunk of my college and my mission. And so I never really thought of these as entrepreneurship, but looking back, I see, these are fundamental skills: advertising, marketing, money management. When you deliver a newspaper to somebody's home for 3 months, but they will not pay you, at some point you got to cut them off. And or learning how to go and collect money, because I would go knock on the door, time to pay for your subscription. All those things are a part of entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, I also had a job. I worked cutting vegetables for a salad bar at the grocery store in my neighborhood. I worked as a lifeguard during the summer. And I was also taking music lessons. I studied violin and piano, and I was playing in an orchestra. And I got tricked into going to a theater audition. I was in choir, and the choir friends said, they need more guys in the musical. So I went and I auditioned, got cast, had a great time, and I thought, this is the best. Why have I never heard of this before? And so I started doing theater. And that's when I decided that I wanted to write musicals. And I went on my mission, came home, Emily and I got married, and at this point in my life, I was, as she said, laser focused on theater. And so I started writing shows, and I was very impatient. I didn't know how you put a show on, but I would kind of ask around, and if nobody else was going to do it for me, I decided I was going to do it myself. So I produced this show that Emily was talking about, and the whole story that she explained. And then coming out of college, we moved to DC, lived in my parents' basement for a few months, and I would shuttle up to New York interviewing for jobs. And finally I got a job as a real low-rung manager on a Broadway show. And I showed up at work, we settled into our life in New York City, and I showed up to work, and I'm so excited because this is theater, it's Broadway, it's fun, it's artistic, it's exciting. And I'm working for one of the top management firms in the Broadway industry, and everything feels contentious. I heard for the first time, labor versus management. I'd never heard this phrase before. Apparently I was management, and labor was the cast and the crew and the musicians, and we were at odds with each other. Like, they wanted to get us and we wanted to get them. At least that's how the narrative went. And they have these thing called unions, where they have all these rules, like this guy, he's a stagehand, so he can't touch the lights, and this guy, he does props, so he can't, or the lights guy can't touch the props, and vice versa, and the actors can't be called for rehearsal X number of hours after a performance completes, and and it's just this fight. And what I realized was that what I was doing before was, I don't know what I'm going to call it. It was fun, it was art, it wasn't a business. At least, I thought it was a business because we were selling tickets and we were making money, but this was a different kind of business. And this is where I was like, I don't understand this. This feels like a machine. This doesn't necessarily have the heart that I thought it did. But I decided that I wanted to understand this machine. I wanted to understand this business, because if I was going to be able to harness its power, I had to learn its ways. And so I was on the business side, and so I would file contracts, I would pay the bills, I would handle the insurance claims, and I did all the boring stuff. But I would get these contracts, and you can't do this in every job, so be careful, but because in this line of work, I was able to take these contracts home. I would take them home and I would read them late at night until I fell asleep, until I understood them. I was not an attorney, but I learned to understand legalese, and I learned to understand the components, the essential components of a contract. And I would get my hands on the financial statements. Had nothing to do with what I was doing with my specific job, but I would read these financial statements and I would, okay, so there's income and there's expenses and there's forecasts for cash flow, and on the very bottom, the last line, it says balance. You have all kinds of income, all kinds of expenses, and at the bottom you have balance. And depending on which format of accounting is being used, this is going to show your profit margin. And we're going to talk about balance in every sense of the word. I was working on a show. I was managing the national tour of Les Miserables. How many of you guys have heard of Les Miserables or seen it? Okay, fantastic, beautiful show with so much heart and so much truth. And this was one of the shows that inspired me to go into this industry in the first place. And so I worked in New York, but the show was playing Boston for about 8 weeks. It was a big chunk of time over the holidays, and the show sat down there, because normally the show would move every week. And it's a big undertaking to move the show. But we were sitting down for the holidays in Boston, and we sold thousands and thousands of tickets. This was like the 9th time Les Mis had been to Boston. This was not new, but the show was selling really well. And so millions of dollars in revenue, and thousands of people seeing the show, thousands of work hours behind the scenes to put the show on. And we close the show, it moves on to its next engagements, and a couple weeks later, I'm looking through the financial statements, and I don't remember the exact number, but it was, I think the revenue was somewhere between $6 and $8 million, and the profit margin for that engagement was about $20,000. $20,000. And my boss, we were sitting in a meeting, and he said, that's a lot of money to take out of a market for that little of a profit margin. And we're not going to talk about all the reasons, because it has to do with, inflationary expenses and union contracts and all kinds of things but that's not the point. The point is everything that came out of that market to create this teeny profit, the balance was so minuscule. It was so because when you go into business, the financial incentive of going into business is to make a profit. That's a small profit margin. It was like 0.4%, which you got to work pretty hard to make a good living off of that kind of a margin. So I want to switch and talk about you for a second, because you're going to have a business, you're going to have an undertaking, and it's going to take a lot out of you. You've got to think about yourselves as a market. How much is going to come out of you for what kind of a return? And on your balance sheet, you're going to have income, and you're going to have expenses, and in your income, you're going to have some numbers. But there's also going to be some intangible things. Income can come in the forms of love, appreciation, encouragement, people that believe in you when you don't believe in yourself, people who cheer you on. That's real income. not just the numbers. And you're going to have expenses. You're going to have worry and stress and anxiety and uncertainty, and your health may struggle. Your relationships may struggle. And those are real expenses. They're going to be the numbers, and then they're going to be the intangible expenses. So when you're working on your business, when you're building your life, when you're moving through time, creating what you're creating, just make sure you're factoring not just the numbers of these expenses and this income and these expenses. Factor in the intangibles. That's going to be your real balance. So I want to talk about the theater business model real quick. The theater business model is real simple. To produce a show, you need a script, which is a story. You need a theater, which is a space where the production can happen and the audience can come see it. And you need money. Story is the heart of the entertainment industry. Every movie, every theater production, every book, the publishing industry, the film industry, the theater industry, it all depends on a good story. This is the hardest part, is finding a good story. Finding a theater, you just got to be scrappy. If you want a Broadway theater, you got to have some connections, you got to have good timing, you got to pull some levers, but you just need a space. We could do a theater production in here. We could do a theater production in the parking lot. You could do it in a warehouse. It doesn't really matter. You just need to have a space, and you got to sometimes pay for it, which come in the money. If you have money, trust me, if you have money, you can hire all the people that you need to make a show happen. Theater people love working for money. And so if you have this, you can hire all the talent that you need. You can rent or buy a theater, and then you get the story. That's how you put on a show. So it's not terribly complicated. Getting money, if you have money, great. If you don't have money, you got to go get it. You got to find it. I didn't have money. I had to go get it and find it. And we're not going to talk about fundraising today, but it's just a matter of making a case why somebody should give you your money and what's in it for them. So I want to talk real quick about that business model. There are two kinds of partners. There are general partners, and these are the decision makers. These are the limited partners. These are the check writers. Limited partners provide the money. General partners provide the brains. I don't know, I guess like a light bulb. I've been both. But I want to talk to you about, actually real quick. So you put the money in, the show pays its bills. These are all the bills. Whatever is left ultimately gets split 50-50 between the general partners and the limited partners. And the general partners take their share and they split it. The limited partners take their share and they split it amongst them. So that's basically the business model. And I want to tell you a story. In the midst of working on Les Miserables and a couple of other shows, I called up this guy. He happens to be a member of the church. We'd met through a project, and he was the CEO of Madison Square Garden. He was a successful entrepreneur in many ways, financially, and he actually was no longer CEO of Madison Square Garden, but he had been, and he'd gotten involved in a couple of theatrical ventures. And so I called him on the phone, and as nicely as I could, I said, "How do you get rich?" And he said, "Here's one way." He said, "If you have a job and somebody offers you $100,000 to work that job for a year, that's one way. If you have a job, same job, and they say, well, we'll offer you $50,000 and 5% of the company, take 5%. That's what's going to make you rich. $100,000 is a good living for almost anybody. 5% is how you create wealth. Always take a percentage." I left Les Miserables, and I was eventually hired to manage the first national tour of Wicked. And I went into my interview, and I said, "I'm interested in a percentage." They said, "No." They said the show is already funded, all the investments, opportunities are gone, we'll pay you for your services. I said, okay. But I said, I'm always interested in a percentage if anything ever comes up. And so they said, okay. And chugging along, working, making things happen. Same office, they're producing a show. It's called the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is a bit of a mouthful, but we got tickets to go see it. Emily and I loved it. We're like, this show is great. And then I'm sitting at my desk, and the general manager comes over to me, and she says, Erik, how would you be interested, or would you be interested in investing a quarter unit? And she tells me what the numbers are, and I don't have a lot of money at this point. And I said, Emily and I talked about it, and we said, it's a risk for us, but yeah, let's do it. And so we invested 1/4 of 1 unit in 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. Investment opportunities like this are usually only open to what are called accredited investors, and that means that there are legal criteria to make these kinds of investments, but essentially means that you can afford to take a big hit and it's not going to ruin your quality of life. We were not those people. We were not accredited investors, but we were savvy. We knew how the business worked. So we had an opportunity to invest in this show. It becomes a big hit. New York Times loves it. It wins Tony Awards. And they create a production in Boston, Chicago, a national tour, and they produce a production in San Francisco. Not all of those were equally successful, but to some degree they all collectively made money. And because we had made the first investment, we had the opportunity to invest in these other shows. And I'm just telling you this business model, not because I expect any of you to go into producing Broadway shows, but something will carry over to whatever it is you want to do. This is a copy of a profit distribution letter, and this was, I think, 6 years after the fact. Profit distribution number 20 for 10%. We are pleased to enclose a profit distribution for the Spelling Bee LP. This represents the limited partners' share in subsidiary rights. That means the show is actually closed several years before, but because we had invested in the early stages, the authors get paid every time the show is produced, whether it's a community theater, a university production, or a school production, or a regional production. The author gets a royalty, and because we helped put the show on the map, the investors, the limited partners and the general partners, get a part of the subsidiary rights. And so since this is a 10% distribution, the investors, or the LPs, limited partners, pro rata share is 5%. These checks continue to get smaller and smaller, but I still get a check from a spelling bee at least once a year. And so this is the power of the percentage. This is the power of intellectual property, whether it's a patent or a copyright, owning or having an opportunity to invest in something that is going to have a shelf life of forever. So I then said, they were putting out the 3rd and 4th national tours of Wicked, and I said, hey, I had so much fun doing this one. Can we invest in Wicked? And we had a chance to make small, again, relatively small, big for us, investments in Wicked, which also yielded big returns. So I'm like, I got this figured out. I know how this works. I'm making money. I got my job. The next step for me is I want to produce my own thing. I want to run my own show. So I say, let's produce an off-Broadway musical. And I team up with Karen, the woman who Emily mentioned, came to see the show that I'd produced while I was in college. And we are producing partners. We are the general partners on this production. And we have a script. We have a show that we like. The show is called The Ark. And we think we've got a contract on a theater in the theater district, and we're working to raise money. We're struggling to get it all closed up because you have to meet your capitalization amount in order to close it all and start spending the money, and we're not there yet. So I'm like, look, either this is going to work or it's not. I quit my job on Wicked. I decided to go full commitment with this thing, and we raised the money for The Ark. We opened the show. This is Emily. due with our fourth child, our son, opening night. And our son was due to be born. He held off till the show opened, and then he went into labor. I told Karen, here, I said, I'm going to check out for 24 hours and just have a baby, okay? I'll get back with you. While I'm out with Emily having a baby, the reviews come in, they're so-so, no lift in ticket sales. Karen, my business partner, who I love and trust, and our general manager just decide that the prudent thing is to post a closing notice, just in case, because right now it doesn't look like this show is going to make money, and rather than just burn through the money that we have, we should cut our losses. Which, for me, is devastating, because I've staked everything on this. I've quit my job. My producing partner has all kinds of other revenue streams from other shows that she's invested in and produced. And this is it for me. It doesn't stick. Despite all the things that I scrambled to do to create marketing and advertising that will lift the show out, there's not enough time, and we closed the show. I'm embarrassed beyond belief. I'm humiliated. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want anyone to talk to me. A couple weeks later, the next day we go to the theater, we mourn with the cast. This is our son who was born the day the show closed. And so I've got this new son. I have 3 beautiful girls. I have a wife who loves me and believes in me. And I'm financially ruined. What is my balance sheet? I am still rich, even though I have no money. A couple weeks later, they run a roundup article on the broken business model of off-Broadway. That's me. I don't know if you recognize me or not, but I am the poster boy of failure for off-Broadway. It turns out that the composer of Wicked also had another show open during the same period of time, closed even faster than my show, but that was still no comfort to me because guess what? He still had Wicked, and I did not. I guess I had a little percentage, which actually really did help during this time period when we were financially wiped out. And tragic. I'm going to fast forward here because I want to make sure we have time to talk and I want to hear your questions. At the time, there was no doubt in my mind that this was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. This was complete failure. But I have to tell you that out of this low point, out of this heartbreak of seeing this thing that I'd put so much heart and soul into, and I'd lost so much of other people's money, over which I felt very guilty, I decided I wanted to do things differently. And I thought, there's got to be a different way to make theater. Out of this came filming one of the musicals that I'd written, creating theater for the screen, which the Metropolitan Opera is doing it now. The National Theatre in London is doing it now. The show that I produced went on to win an Emmy Award, which put $0 in my pocket, by the way. Just so you know, winning awards is a complete nothing. It doesn't. I have so many friends that have won Tony Awards, and they are broke or sick. Some of them have had tragic deaths. Winning awards does nothing for you. If you're going to look at your balance sheet and you're going to put a Tony Award or a Grammy Award or whatever, Better Business, I don't know what all the awards are in your industry, you add that to your income, it's a 0. It's a big fat 0. And so as I was too embarrassed to go get another job. They'd already replaced me at Wicked. And so I got this temp job. Emily talked about working graphics at this bank. I got a night job. I would work 4 to midnight at this investment bank, and I would just do their spreadsheets and pie charts and whatnot. And I would just walk along the Hudson River. And it was when I was walking along the Hudson River at night, taking my dinner break, feeling sorry for myself, that's when I watched these sailboats go up and down at sunset. and I decided that I wanted to sail with my family. My kids were only with me for so many years, and then when they're gone, they're gone. You're here, you know it. How often do you see your parents? How much time are you spending with your parents? It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But that time at home is limited. And I said, I only have my kids for a certain number of years. They are my priority. Fast forward, we worked hard to make ends meet. We lived off of food storage for a while. We finally got our footing again. We started sailing. A couple years later, we bought a sailboat in the Caribbean. I quit all work. We moved down to the Caribbean aboard this boat. We made amazing friends. Our kids, I had a time with my kids that can never be replaced. It can never be undone. As Emily mentioned, they're moving out. We have a daughter who's a senior studying film. We have a daughter on a mission. We have a daughter who desperately wants to come here. I'm so happy for them, but they're never going to live under our roof again. I'm so glad I made this investment on my balance sheet. We flew to the Caribbean. We sailed from the Caribbean. This is our route. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Bahamas, over to Florida, and then all the way up back to Manhattan. A few years later, I felt like the thing that I had to do was write this down, because after everything is said and done, after all the businesses are opened and closed, and after all the investments run their course, the thing that's going to last is this story. It's the stories that we write in our lives. It's the stories that we live out that will last forever. And so, go out, build a business, earn money, make money. Everything's easier with money, trust me. Change the world, take care of your families, do good, serve, help. But just know that when it comes time to look at your balance sheet, there are going to be some numbers for income. There are going to be some numbers for expenses. Add in all the things that don't have a number, because when you get to the bottom and you look at your balance, take it all in. May God bless you in your efforts. Thank you. Is this where we do Q&A? Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if you guys need a microphone to ask questions, but I have pretty good hearing, so you can just shout them out. And we've got, 10 minutes? So, easy questions only. I only want easy questions. Yes? How did we fund our sailing trip? From savings. We bought the boat, we financed the boat, we sublet our apartment so that we didn't have that expense. We knew that we had to sell the boat when we came back, and so we actually bought a more expensive boat than we wanted to, so that we knew it would be able to resell. And we sold it for the exact amount that we bought it for, and all the other expenses were paid from savings. It's surprisingly cheap to live on a boat. People think it's like a rich person experience. It is not. It's like living in an RV for a year. Good question. Other easy questions. Yes?
Where did you learn to sail?
I learned this good. Oh, thank you. Yeah, actually, that job that I had, that temp job, right downstairs was a sailing school. I didn't know it at the time, but I literally walked downstairs, and I was like, because I talked to Emily about it, and I was like, I don't know anything about sailing. I didn't grow up sailing. Never owned a sailboat. I don't know anybody who sails. But she encouraged me to check it out. I walked in and I said, how does this work? I did have to actually get humble and go back. I took on some contract work back in the theater business to pay for the sailing lessons, because we couldn't afford it otherwise. But that's how I learned. That's how we started. And then we sailed in small, sorry, I shouldn't have closed this out. The picture of our whole family in that boat. We got these day sailors. It was like $140 a month to join this little club. And then Emma and I went to the Caribbean for a 1-week class. And then we just baby steps all along the way, figuring it out. Good question. Thank you. Other questions? Yes?
What advice do you have for theater majors who need to learn all the stuff that you, I think, learned the hard way?
Oh, you know, a lot of theater people and a lot of creative people in general say, oh, you know, I'm not good with money. Or I'm a creative person, which sort of implies that you don't know how to build a spreadsheet. Or, you know, do forecast cash flow. I think that in addition to learning an art form, did I unplug something or are we still good? Your question is, what advice do we have for theater majors? Invest in shows. I mean, that's probably bad investment advice, because if you're going to just invest, there's much, much safer investments than theater. Trust me, it's a complete crapshoot. I learned that when people, you know, invest, I would be talking to a potential investor and they're like, what's the likelihood of this succeeding? I used to have some statistics that I would be like, you know, well, like 1 in 10 shows makes a killing, and 4 out of 5, or 40% of shows recoup, and the rest are a loss. So you do the numbers. I'd be like, I don't tell that to anybody. I'm like, you know what? If you can't afford to lose this money, don't give it to me. Plan on losing it, and if you get any of it back, bonus. So, but I think don't let that be an excuse to say, oh, I'm a creative person, or I don't know what other kind of people sort of step aside from learning money and business, because for me it's a kind of literacy. Money is neutral. It's like the weather. If you learn how to forecast the weather, you can know when you have to have an umbrella. You know when you want to wear shorts or when you want to wear a coat. If you know how to deal with money, you take a lot of the uncertainty out of your life. There's always uncertainty, but learning how to manage money will reduce the stress. Even if having small amounts of money, you say, okay, now I know how much money I have. And it's not a question. It's when you don't know that you worry. So I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question, but don't be afraid of learning the business side, I guess is what I would say. Other questions? Any hard questions?
What were some of the biggest things in your life that helped prepare you for each pivot that you took?
Thanks for using the word pivot, by the way. I think first, acceptance. Saying, look, okay, I cannot change the fact that my show closed. Or, for example, our youngest daughter has Down syndrome. Okay, she has Down syndrome. That's just saying, accepting what is, and then saying, what are my options? And also, I think I would say, what is the worst case scenario? If I do this, what's the worst that could happen? When we were going to go sailing, we said, okay, here are the worst case scenarios. We could die or be injured. We could be financially ruined forever. Like, I'll never get another job. We'll never be able to earn more money for some reason. We could be financially ruined. Or, and surprisingly, I think one of the hardest ones was we could embarrass ourselves. We could look dumb in front of our friends and family or anybody else that's watching. And we decided that if we could be okay with the worst case scenarios, then we could move ahead with confidence. And so I think any pivot is saying, accepting what is, looking at your options, picking a direction, saying what's the worst that could happen, and being okay with the worst case scenario, and then doing everything you can to improve upon the worst case scenario. We were not financially ruined. I earned more money coming back from that trip than I ever had prior to it. And it was hard, and it was difficult and challenging, but it was by no means embarrassing, even though we failed plenty. And so I think our fears get the best of us. Our fears are what hold us back more than anything. So overcoming our fears is I think, the most important part of pivoting. Paul.
I think building off of the question on theater, with the advice you have for theater majors, you also wrote a book. And so for those that are aspiring authors or English majors, but
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we are new to the publishing space. Emily and I do not claim expertise in this area. I think the hardest thing is to actually get a book written. Because so many people, myself included, for so long say, "Oh, I should write this book. I should write this story." Committing to writing as a habit is the key to success, I think, for being an author. There's a great book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote a bestseller that you might have heard of called Eat, Pray, Love. And long before she had an international bestseller, she was just steady every day. I mean, I could give you so many awesome books on how to be a writer, and very few of them are about, the purpose is not about getting published. Getting published is gravy. But writing in and of itself, recognizing that writing has intrinsic value. You talk about a balance sheet. If you write a book, even if nobody else reads it, it never gets published, nobody buys a single copy, you've just put so much value into your income because you have learned something important about yourself. And then as you work through the process, if you want to get technical about it, I would say find an agent. An agent will open all kinds of doors for you. And by finding an agent is about learning who they are, knowing who you are, and finding a match, and not being afraid to knock on doors. We didn't talk at all about knocking on doors today, but Emily said, after we came back from the boat, I decided to do something totally different, and I became a door-to-door salesman for a solar company. And I learned the power of just knocking on doors. And I made more money doing that than is right. It's like being a drug dealer or something. But when we went to shop for an agent, I said, we're going to knock on 100 doors. We're going to pitch to 100 agents. Because it's just the law of statistics. If we pitch to 100 people and nobody thinks this is a good idea, then we self-publish. Then we put our own money on because if we're the only ones at that point that think it's a good idea, then we have to put our own money into it. We did find an agent that way, and then make a habit of writing, be persistent, knock on a lot of doors, get an agent, and the rest will go from there. Thanks for that question. I know we're out of time, but I'm happy to take another question or two, or if you need to go, I don't want to make you late for your next class. But any other hard, or at this point I'll take a hard question, or an easy question, or you can go to your next class. I'll be around if you guys want to chat. Thank you very much. It's been a great visit.